Ladies and gentlemen, we've been told that fat loss is all about willpower, counting calories, and spending hours on a treadmill. And while diet and exercise matter, what most people miss is this: fat loss is fundamentally a neurological process. If you want lasting results, you must treat it that way. When people talk about fat loss, they usually go straight to diet and exercise, and sure, those matter. But before we even touch the surface of macros, calorie deficits, or workout splits, we need to take a big step back and understand something fundamental. Your brain runs the show. Every craving you feel, every moment of resistance or surrender, every spark of motivation or crash of willpower, it's not random. It's neurobiology. The brain, specifically your hypothalamus, plays a central role in regulating hunger and satiety. Think of the hypothalamus as a sort of thermostat for your internal state. It monitors hormones like leptin, which signals fullness, and ghrelin, which signals hunger. When you're in an energy deficit, meaning you're burning more calories than you're consuming, your ghrelin levels rise, and the hypothalamus increases hunger signals to get you to eat more. That's the body doing what it's supposed to do. It's protecting you from what it perceives as starvation. But here's where things get really interesting and challenging. The modern food environment is filled with hyper-palatable, ultra-processed foods that light up your brain's reward centers like a slot machine. These foods bypass normal satiety signals and instead create what's called non-homeostatic eating. Eating not because you need fuel, but because your brain is chasing a reward. Dopamine, the molecule most associated with motivation and craving, gets released in anticipation of these foods, especially sugar and fat combinations that don't naturally exist in nature. The more often you engage with this loop, chronic exposure to hyper-rewarding food, the more your brain learns to prioritize those choices even when you're not physically hungry. This is not about lack of discipline. It's about a shift in neural wiring. The brain begins to associate certain contexts, like watching Netflix at night or driving past that one bakery, with the anticipation of a dopamine reward. That association strengthens over time, creating automatic behaviors that feel hard to resist because they are hard to resist. They're deeply embedded in your brain's reward circuitry. And then there's the role of the prefrontal cortex, the region of your brain responsible for executive functions like self-control, planning, and delayed gratification. This is the part of the brain that says, I don't need that cookie right now, or I'll stick to the plan even though I'm stressed. But here's the catch. The prefrontal cortex is incredibly sensitive to things like sleep deprivation, chronic stress, and emotional fatigue. When you're tired, overwhelmed, or anxious, this part of your brain goes offline, figuratively, but also neurologically. What takes over in those moments is the more primitive part of the brain, the limbic system, which is impulsive, emotional, and geared toward immediate gratification. So when you've had a rough day, didn't sleep well, and your stress is peaking, it's not just that your willpower is low, it's that your neural architecture is set up to favor impulsive decisions. The cookie wins, not because you're weak, but because the part of your brain designed to override that craving is offline. Now, understanding this should be liberating because it means fat loss isn't just about pushing harder or blaming yourself. It means there are specific practical ways to support the brain systems that govern eating behavior. For example, let's talk about sleep. Studies consistently show that even a single night of poor sleep increases ghrelin, decreases leptin, and boosts activity in the brain's reward centers. Translation, you're hungrier, less satisfied, and more drawn to high-calorie foods, all because your brain is trying to compensate for low energy availability. Sleep also modulates the activity of the prefrontal cortex. When you're well rested, this part of the brain is active and engaged. You can plan meals, resist temptation, and stay focused on your long-term goals. But when sleep drops below 6 hours, its function begins to deteriorate. The emotional brain, the limbic system, starts calling the shots. Stress operates in a similar way. Chronic stress increases levels of cortisol, a hormone that promotes fat storage, particularly in the abdominal region. But more importantly, stress changes the way your brain processes reward. Under high stress, people are more likely to choose immediate pleasure over long-term benefit. This is called a temporal discounting effect, and it's driven by shifts in dopamine signaling. And it's not just about what you eat or how much you move, it's also when and why. Emotional eating, boredom eating, anxiety-driven snacking. These aren't just psychological patterns, they are neurochemical loops that get stronger every time you give in. But here's the hopeful part. The brain is plastic. That means it can change. You can rewire those loops. And that starts with bringing awareness to the patterns and then disrupting them. Let's take a practical example. If you know you always crave sugar at 9 p.m. while watching TV, recognize that it's not just about the sugar, it's about the dopamine anticipation. Your brain has learned that 9 p.m. plus TV equals sugar equals dopamine. That's a conditioned loop. You don't break that loop by just saying no and white-knuckling it. You break it by replacing the behavior with a different dopamine nauseative action. Go for a 5-minute walk, do breath work, stretch, or sip herbal tea. Over time, the brain begins to associate that same context with a different form of relief or reward. The goal here isn't to eliminate all cravings. That's not realistic. The goal is to create enough neural flexibility that you can pause before acting on them. That moment of pause, that's your prefrontal cortex coming online. That's you working with your brain, not against it. Another simple but powerful tool is sunlight exposure early in the day. When you view natural light within the first hour of waking, you not only anchor your circadian rhythm, which improves sleep quality that night, but you also boost levels of dopamine and cortisol in a way that increases alertness and reduces cravings throughout the day. It sounds simple, and it is, but it's deeply grounded in neurobiology. Movement, even light movement, also modulates hunger and reward pathways in the brain. A short walk after meals doesn't just help with blood sugar, it boosts brain-decreased neurotrophic factor, BDNF, which enhances neuroplasticity. That means your brain becomes more capable of change. It becomes easier to form new habits and break old ones. So when we say fat loss is a neurological process, we mean it literally. Your hypothalamus, your prefrontal cortex, your dopamine circuits, your stress response system, they are all involved in every step of the journey. And the more you learn to support these systems, not fight them, the more sustainable and sane your fat loss process becomes. It's not about being perfect. It's about being aware. It's about recognizing that cravings are brain signals, not moral failures. That fatigue and stress aren't just uncomfortable. They're neurological states that directly impact your decisions, and that by managing those states, you put yourself back in the driver's seat. So rather than constantly blaming yourself for not having enough discipline, start asking better questions. Am I sleeping enough? Am I managing stress in a healthy way? Am I giving my brain the conditions it needs to make good decisions? Because fat loss isn't a battle of willpower, it's a battle of brain states. And when you shift those states, everything else gets easier. So we've talked about how your brain regulates cravings, hunger, and decision-making, but let's take a step further into how your nervous system specifically determines whether your body is in a fat-burning state or not. This isn't about whether you went to the gym today or followed a low-carb meal plan. This is deeper. This is about your state, your internal physiological condition that your nervous system creates and modulates. Here's what you need to understand. Your body doesn't just burn fat because you tell it to. It burns fat when the conditions are right. Those conditions are largely dictated by which branch of your autonomic nervous system is dominant in the moment. Now, your autonomic nervous system has two main branches, the sympathetic nervous system, commonly associated with the fight or flight response, and the parasympathetic nervous system, often referred to as the rest and digest mode. When you're in a sympathetic dominant state, stressed, anxious, multitasking under pressure, your body is not prioritizing digestion, metabolic efficiency, or fat oxidation. It's prioritizing survival. It's dumping glucose into your bloodstream, increasing your heart rate, narrowing your focus, and putting your body on high alert. This can be useful in small bursts, like during a workout, but if you're living in that state all day, waking up stressed, eating on the go, rushing through your day, and then scrolling until midnight, you're keeping your body in a prolonged activated state, and that is metabolically inefficient when it comes to fat loss. Now let's flip to the parasympathetic side. This is the calm, present, alert, but relaxed state, where your body can digest food properly, regulate hormones like insulin and cortisol, and most importantly, access stored fat as fuel. Fat oxidation, which is the technical term for burning fat, happens best when the nervous system isn't on high alert. So the more time you spend in a parasympathetic dominant state, the more favorable your internal environment becomes for actual, efficient fat metabolism. This isn't just about relaxation in the spa sense. This is about building physiological habits that shift your nervous system in the right direction repeatedly throughout the day. And there are very practical, science-supported ways to do that. One of the most powerful and often overlooked tools is nasal breathing, especially slow, deliberate breathing through the nose. Just 1 to 3 minutes of slow nasal breathing, extending your exhales to be slightly longer than your inhales can shift your nervous system from sympathetic to parasympathetic. This isn't a spiritual idea, it's a mechanical one. The vagus nerve, which plays a huge role in calming the nervous system, is activated by slow diaphragmatic breathing. That activation sends a signal up to your brain that says, we're safe, we can relax, we're not under threat. And when your brain believes that, it turns down stress hormone production and turns up metabolic processes associated with long-term energy use, including fat oxidation. Cold exposure is another tool that directly interacts with your nervous system to shift you into a more alert yet grounded state. Brief cold exposure, like a cold shower or immersion, activates the sympathetic nervous system initially, but then leads to a rebound parasympathetic tone afterward, meaning you get a burst of focus and energy followed by a calming, steady state. This rebound period can last hours and has been shown to increase norepinephrine and dopamine in a sustained way, which improves mood, focus, and metabolic efficiency. But here's the key. It's not just about single interventions. It's about how you structure your day to train your nervous system to spend more time in that calm, alert state. For example, something as simple as getting sunlight in your eyes within 30-60 minutes of waking dramatically impacts your cortisol rhythm. And when your cortisol rhythm is well regulated, your energy is stable, your appetite is more predictable, and your body's internal clock aligns with natural metabolic cycles. Let's also talk about movement, but not in the way people usually think of it. Yes, structured workouts are important, but gentle, low-intensity movement throughout the day, like walking, stretching, or even just standing while you work, creates a state of low-level physiological arousal that keeps you metabolically active without overstressing the system. This type of movement supports fat oxidation better than most people realize. Take walking after meals. When you go for a 10-15 minute walk post-meal, you blunt the glucose spike, improve insulin sensitivity, and help your body use that incoming energy more efficiently. But beyond the metabolic benefits, walking also shifts the brain into a bilateral, rhythmically engaged state that calms the nervous system and enhances cognitive function. So again, we're talking about changing your state, not just burning a few extra calories. And that's really the theme here. Fat loss is not about chasing calorie burn in a single session. It's about creating a neurophysiological environment that favors fat being used as fuel consistently over time. That happens when your nervous system is regulated. That happens when you're not spiking cortisol all day with stress, overtraining, undersleeping, and constant mental stimulation. Now, I'm not saying you should never be in a sympathetic state. Intense workouts, short bursts of cold, or even brief mental challenges can be incredibly useful, but you want to move in and out of those states with control, like a switch, not be stuck in on mode all day. When you're constantly on edge, your digestion suffers, sleep quality declines, and your body becomes more likely to store fat, particularly around the abdomen. That's not just aesthetics, that's a marker of systemic stress. One of the easiest, most accessible tools to reset the nervous system in real time is what's known as physiological sighing, a deep double inhale through the nose followed by a slow exhale through the mouth. Research shows this one breathing pattern is the fastest way to reduce stress in the body. It's free, it takes 10-30 seconds, and you can do it anytime, anywhere. That's nervous system training in action. So you want to think about your daily behaviors not just as healthy or unhealthy, but in terms of how they shift your internal state. Is this action moving me into a parasympathetic fat oxidizing state, or is it keeping me stuck in a high-lip sugar craving fat storing state? That's the lens we need to start using if we really want to understand fat loss in a sustainable, science-backed way. Sleep, again, plays a role here too. Deep restorative sleep is one of the only times when your body shifts into full repair mode. Growth hormone is released, fat oxidation increases, and your nervous system resets. But if you're not sleeping well, either due to late night screen use, stress, or inconsistent wake times, your entire system gets thrown off and you start the next day behind. More cravings, more impulsivity, more nervous system reactivity. Even your food choices interact with your nervous system. Eating quickly while distracted or under stress shifts blood flow away from digestion and into the muscles and brain. That impairs nutrient absorption, slows gastric emptying, and often leads to overeating because your brain doesn't register fullness in time. By contrast, eating slowly, chewing thoroughly, and paying attention to your food activates parasympathetic processes, improving digestion and satiety. So fat loss, again, is not just about macros. It's not even just about habits. It's about your state. Your nervous system is the gatekeeper for metabolic efficiency, hormonal balance, and behavioral consistency. And the beautiful part is it's trainable. You can condition your body to spend more time in the fat burning state, not by doing more, but by regulating better. This is not about being passive, it's about being strategic. Creating moments throughout the day where your body and brain can downshift into calm alertness, into presence, into control. That's where the long-term results come from. That's how you stop chasing fat loss and start living in a state where it happens naturally. And once you understand how to work with your nervous system rather than ignore it or fight it, you realize fat loss isn't a battle, a shift in how you live, how you breathe, how you move, and how you recover. When you create the internal conditions for fat to be used as fuel, your body responds. Let's now talk about the mechanism that really drives change over time, neuroplasticity, and why consistent action is the secret to lasting fat loss, but not just any action. I'm talking about action that taps into the brain's reward systems and reinforces the very circuits responsible for discipline, motivation, and long-term behavior change. Because if fat loss is going to happen and stay sustainable, your brain has to want to keep doing what's working. And the way we make that happen is through dopamine. Now, dopamine gets misunderstood a lot. People often reduce it to the pleasure chemical, but that's not accurate. Dopamine's about motivation. It's the molecule your brain releases in anticipation of a reward, not after you receive it. It's what propels you to take action, to pursue something, to show up again and again, and is tightly tied to how habits are formed and reinforced. Every time you take an action that moves you toward a goal, whether that's choosing a high-protein breakfast, walking instead of scrolling, or doing your planned workout, if you attach meaning to that action, your brain releases dopamine. And over time, those small actions, repeated with intention, begin to rewire your neural circuits. That's neuroplasticity in action. You start to become the kind of person who wakes up and chooses movement, the kind of person who doesn't need to negotiate every food decision. That identity, what we think of as willpower, isn't just a mental shift, it's a physical change in the way your neurons fire and connect. But here's the important part. Your brain doesn't just give you dopamine for doing the big stuff. It gives you dopamine for noticing and rewarding the effort. And this is where a lot of people go wrong. They think it was just a 10-minute walk, or I only skipped dessert once this week. So they dismiss those efforts, which means the brain doesn't register it as progress. No dopamine hit, no reinforcement, and therefore no habit being built. What you want to do instead is link dopamine to the process, not just the outcome. You don't wait until you've lost 20 pounds to feel proud. You feel proud the moment you resist that third cup of coffee and drink water instead. You acknowledge it, you said mentally or even out loud, that was a win. That moment lights up the reward circuitry in your brain. That's how you wire in the behavior. You make consistency the thing that feels good, not just the end result. This process of reinforcing small positive behaviors is more powerful than motivation because motivation is unreliable. It fluctuates with mood, energy, and circumstance. But dopamine, applied strategically, builds momentum. It becomes a feedback loop. You do the right thing, reward yourself for doing it, and that makes it more likely you'll do it again. So when you're trying to lose fat, your job isn't just to eat less and move more. Your job is to train your brain to like the feeling of doing hard things. That means starting small and consistently winning, even tiny wins. In fact, the smaller and more achievable the task, the more often you can win. And the more opportunities you have to reinforce the circuit. Let's say you set a goal of walking 30 minutes a day. Some days you'll do it, other days you won't. But if you shrink the target, say commit to walking just 2 minutes after each meal, you create a situation where success is nearly guaranteed. And once you're out the door for 2 minutes, it often turns into 10, 15, or 30. But even if it doesn't, you still won and you rewarded the behavior, which builds the circuit. Over time, your brain starts anticipating the reward, not from food, not from checking out or giving in, but from effort itself. That is a massive shift. It's not just mental toughness. It's a reorientation of your entire motivational architecture. And this isn't hypothetical. It's deeply rooted in the biology of how dopamine and motivation circuits in the brain actually work. Dopamine is released from a part of the brain called the ventral tegmental area, VTA, and travels to structures like the nucleus accumbens and the prefrontal cortex. These areas aren't just involved in craving and reward. They are also involved in planning, persistence, and decision-making, meaning when you reinforce the behavior with dopamine, you're literally strengthening the part of the brain that helps you stick to the plan, even when motivation is low. But here's the key. Dopamine is also contextual. If you're constantly stimulating your dopamine system with easy, fast reward behaviors, scrolling social media, binge eating, high sugar snacks, constant novelty, your brain becomes less sensitive to natural rewards. That makes the more meaningful, slower building wins feel less satisfying. So part of the fat loss process involves not just what you do, but what you don't do. You want to reduce the background noise. You want to make space in your brain so that the dopamine hits you get from discipline actually register. That means limiting hyperstimulating behaviors. It doesn't mean you can't enjoy life. It means you learn to delay some rewards so that your brain starts prioritizing the ones that align with your long-term goals. And when you do that, when you link dopamine to discipline instead of distraction, you create a stable foundation for long-term fat loss. You're no longer at the mercy of cravings or burnout because the reward isn't external anymore, it's internal, it's neurochemical. Your brain starts craving the structure, the progress, the momentum, and that's what makes the process sustainable. Another important piece here is to periodically reevaluate what you're reinforcing. Let's say you've been walking daily, eating better, and losing weight for 2 months. Great. But if you stop reinforcing those behaviors, if you stop noticing them and rewarding yourself for showing up, they'll start to feel stale. The brain needs novelty. It needs challenge. So you have to increase the stakes just slightly, not overhaul everything, just enough to keep the dopamine flowing. Maybe that means adding a light strength session or cooking one new meal per week or trying a new form of movement. The goal is not to constantly chase intensity, but to keep the brain engaged, to keep the reward system tuned in to progress. And here's where people get discouraged. They think progress always has to be visible on the scale, in the mirror, in how clothes fit. But the brain doesn't care about those things as much as it cares about forward motion. It wants to know, are we doing what we said we would do? Are we getting better at this? Are we in control? If the answer to those questions is yes, you will feel a sense of satisfaction even if external progress is slower than you hoped. That's what makes this process so powerful. You don't have to wait for motivation. You don't have to hope for results. You generate momentum through behavior, attention, and reward. That's a neurological process, and it's one you control. So if you're struggling with consistency, the question isn't, how do I force myself to be more disciplined? The better question is, how do I set up my day so that the right behaviors feel rewarding? That could mean starting the day with a quick win. It could mean limiting distractions in the evening. It could mean tracking something simple and celebrating it. And that's where this all comes together. Fat loss is a brain process. It's governed by hormones and habits, but also by attention, dopamine, and neuroplasticity. And once you understand that, you stop blaming yourself for struggling and start getting curious about how to work with your brain instead of against it. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to understand the system and use it. That's how you make fat loss not just possible, but automatic.